Hello, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Thought Leader Academy. I'm Andrea Sampson. I'm the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy. If you're new here, make sure to take a look around. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about what it is to be a thought leader and why do we need more thought leaders in the world. This is something that's come to me over time. I spent most of my career, as some of you know, in advertising. And I was a strategist and a planner. I did tons of research and I got to know the consumer really well. But it was always through the lens of purchasing and buying. You see, advertising is really fueling a capitalist world. And one day I woke up and realized that I was an idealist in a capitalist world, and it was time for me to make a change. Now, at the time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had spent close to 25 years working in marketing and advertising. I had worked for not-for-profits as a fundraiser. I had organized events. I had worked on the service side in account management and in advertising. The thing was, I loved marketing. And why I loved marketing was because I got to understand consumers really well. And I love human behavior. I'm a student of human behavior. I've read so many books and done courses and just generally studied psychology and human behavior. And marketing gave me this opportunity to really see it in real time, because that's what we do as marketers, is we're always putting things out in the world and seeing how people react. And it was fun and interesting and fascinating. But here I was, realizing that this world wasn't for me anymore. And it had truly lost its fascination for me. I wasn't enjoying my time. And what happened for me was I started going out and going to conferences and starting to look around. And in doing so, I started seeing a lot of people who were using their voice. And these were people, in some cases, experts. They had done incredible work in terms of education, experience, research. They were the real deal. They were doing the work and they were talking about it. They were truly thought leaders. Now, in those days, I didn't really differentiate between a thought leader and an expert, but I come to realize now that's what they were. But there were so many other people who were out there using their voice. And those were the ones actually that I really enjoyed, who didn't have a deep background in maybe academia or technology or science, but they were talking about things that were making a difference in our world. And some of these people had done all of those important pieces. They had done the work. They had created brands for themselves. In some cases, these people had deep backgrounds, but what they were talking about was often different than what I had ever heard. And certainly when I started in the TED world, that really opened my eyes. I started seeing this whole group of people who were doing such good work in the world. And that work was actually changing the world for the better. Many of them were really bad speakers, quite frankly. And it was hard to really access their knowledge, because as I would listen to them, I would get lost in lots and lots of detail, sometimes data, sometimes it was just sort of circular talk of them trying to find a point. When they eventually did, I was usually really intrigued by what they were saying. But it took so long to get there that I often lost interest or had to go back and rewatch it or talk to them individually. And I would do that a lot. And I started to understand that what they were doing is that they were contributing their voice to help me and everybody else in the audience understand their thinking better. Now, whether they were great speakers or bad speakers, they were still using their voice. And the ones that were most effective were the ones who were using their story. And of course, this is why we love TED Talks, because people use their stories. But these were the talks that really helped me to understand their unique point of view. And as I delved deeper into who they were and what gave them that perspective. I started to understand that it wasn't so much about the education they had or the experience they had, but it was the combination of those things along with their own background, their unique upbringing, their culture, their context for how they live, perhaps their choices around how they interact with other people. Maybe it was their gender orientation or the way their brain works. Often they were neurodiverse. And what I started to understand was these differences were what created an access point for me, first of all, to understand what they were saying, but actually more importantly, an access point for them to find their unique point of view. Because all of those things that made them unique gave them a perspective that allowed them to think through a problem, a challenge, an observation in a way that nobody else could. And as a result, they were coming up with ideas or ways of addressing that problem or challenge or, interaction in a different way than anyone else. And I would learn from that. That was powerful. And when I made the decision to leave advertising years later, after spending almost 5 years working on a TEDx brand and working directly with speakers and presenters, I knew that one of the things that I wanted to do was to help people to really step into that uniqueness. And this was really powerful. And in those early years of creating my company, Talk Boutique, I worked with so many scientists and academics and technologists and even artists. And what I found, the unique thing that went through all of them, were two thoughts. One was, well, I'm not really a great speaker, or I'm not a creator. And that, for artists, they might say they were creative, but they didn't see themselves as a thought leader or somebody who could hold a room. And for scientists, academics, and technologists, they didn't see themselves as creative, but were very comfortable in the data. And the second thing was, regardless of who I talked to, they didn't want to use their story. They thought their story was boring, that no one would want to hear their story. They wanted to tell stories that were maybe case studies or stories of other people who had actually done the work. But their story, in their mind, wasn't all that interesting. They couldn't have been more wrong. Well, first of all, of course, we all love stories, and we love hearing each other's stories. It's just interesting to know how we've come to the ideas or the concepts or just even the places in our lives that we have. But what it does is our stories act as context for our thinking, of course. But for most people, telling a story, especially your own life story, because you've lived it, it's hard to formulate that story in such a way that it's interesting to other people and that you're touching on the right points and the right moments. And this is something that, as I reflect back on my time going to conferences and listening to many speakers, that was the difference between those who I saw as experts and those who I would now call our thought leaders. You see, those who are thought leaders understood that their context, their lives, the way they saw the world, the things that made them different was the very thing that would help to contextualize the ideas that they were putting out there in the world. And so they would use them. And this is something that I've come to understand, is that when we look at the world we have today, the world as it is now is shaped by the thought leaders who spoke to us all many years ago. Those thought leaders had a vision for the future. Now, each person, of course, isn't creating a future on their own. They're contributing to a co-created vision for the future. And that co-created vision is happening through our leadership. Some of it is political leadership. Some of it is industry leadership. Some of it is community leadership. But of course, it's always leadership. And in truth, it's thought leadership, because those who are creating the vision are in fact thought leaders. And what they're doing is they're using their experiences to contribute something to that collective vision. Where we are today, I think we can all agree, is not reflective of all of those who are living in this world. When we look around, whether you are in North America like I am or in some other part of the world, often we look around and realize that there are those who have been excluded from the society that's been created, or the accepted norms of the society that's been created. We want to do something about that, but we don't know what. And so we might support a cause. But what about adding your voice? Because here's the thing. When we think about thought leadership and we stop thinking about it as something that others do, and we start embracing it as something that we each do, it allows us to contribute our voice, our unique perspective, our unique context to a co-created vision for a future. Now, you may say, look, I live in a small town somewhere, who knows where, and how am I going to co-create a future? When you use your voice and your story, and you bring your voice and your story together so that somebody, even just one person, understands what you're saying, it inspires them to do the same. They hear somebody who maybe has had a similar experience, maybe looks like them, maybe is providing the context for them to understand something in a way that they never could have before. And in doing so, they then choose to use their voice, and something happens for somebody in their sphere of influence, and so on and so on. This isn't a new story. We've all heard this concept before, but I want you to hear it just a little bit differently. What I want you to hear in this is that your uniqueness, what makes you you, is exactly what the world needs to co-create a future that is inclusive of you. Because each one of us is contributing something. And when we do this, what we're doing is we're creating a future that is inclusive, that is sustainable, and that represents all who are living within it. When you think about your own voice and your own perspective, what is it that you know that the rest of us need to understand? It doesn't need to be world-changing for everyone. It only needs to be world-changing for you. And when you tell that story and explain that idea in a way that other people can hear it, now what happens is you've inspired somebody else. But more importantly, you've stepped into who you are as a thought leader. And you are now choosing how to show up. So storytelling is a key to it. How do you tell a story? There are many resources right here on my channel that you can download for free. And in fact, I'll make sure to put one of those into the show notes. So you can just click and download our story spine, our idea framework. These are tools that we've created to help you find your thought leadership. But I want you to start thinking about your life a little bit differently. I want you to start thinking about your life as a story that holds context and holds relevance. What are the parts of your life that are important? For me, I grew up in the eastern part of Canada, in Nova Scotia, in a city, but a small city. I had a big family. Now, these are all aspects of me. Are they important? Sometimes. Sometimes it's really important for me to use that part of who I am when I'm contextualizing something. When I'm contextualizing something that maybe is relevant to growing up in a small city, in a seaside town. I can use the context of that to help illuminate an idea. I'm also neurodiverse, something I didn't know until I was in my mid-50s. And when I found out, I really didn't think it was going to change my world, but it did. Because that one piece of information that I didn't have for over 50 years of my life helped me to understand not only who I am, but how I think. And it was other people's talks that helped me to see that. When my doctor diagnosed me with neurodiversity and talked to me about it being who I am, I needed to find everything I could about it. I read books, I listened to talks, I talked to other people, I did interviews, and what I started to learn through their context was how powerful this diagnosis was for me. Because what it showed me was that while I have a difference in the way my brain works, by understanding that difference, I can access my own knowledge better. I wouldn't have known that if the people I listened to, the books that I read, and those who I spoke with hadn't been able to tell me it in a way that I could hear it. So understanding my own neurodiversity and how that contributes to my thought leadership came from those who had also done that work. And that, for me, was really life-changing. And I continue to learn about myself. But what I learn as I'm delving deeper into it is that the way that I think is different. And because of that, I see the world differently. And so now, as I work with my clients, as I spend time with other thought leaders, I'm very aware of thinking patterns. I'm very aware of speed of thought and what the needs of that individual are. Now, that's helped me to be a better coach, but actually, it's also helped me to understand that we need to change the way, in some cases, we govern, that the accepted laws of our society, because it has unconscious bias built into it for a different way of thinking, a different way of behaving. I speak often about being neurodiverse because I think it needs to be more accepted. It's not a disability. What it is a difference. As a result, we need to not necessarily make accommodations, but understand the implications in the way we work, in the way that we live, and in the way that we exist within our communities. And so when individuals with various forms of neurodiversity show up, not only is there more empathy, but there's, in fact, ways in which for them to show up that is normalized and that is created in a way that helps them to be a functioning part of that event or that community or that workspace. Understanding our own differences and leaning into those differences as the way in which we contextualize what we think and why we think it helps others to do the same. But more importantly, it contributes towards a co-creation of a future that's more sustainable, more equitable, more inclusive, and one that's representative of all who are living within it. So thought leadership isn't something big and lofty. It can be, and certainly there are many thought leaders who have done incredible work, who have deep education, and are doing that work on a regular basis. But there are also thought leaders who come from our community, who come from our family, who are Indigenous people who have lived on the land their entire lives. They're thought leaders in helping us to understand their way of life and their way of seeing the world. And that needs to be built into the future we're creating. Using our voice to co-create our future is the most important thing that any one of us can contribute to our world. So speak up. Use your voice. Tell us your unique perspective. What's your idea? How did you come to it? What is the uniqueness of you that is creating something that we all need to know? Thanks so much for listening. And if you haven't already done so, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified when we upload new content. And I hope to see you back here real soon.